All right. 8 years ago, this month, on September 19th, marked the 8th anniversary when my mother passed away. And I remember that day quite well because normally I make the announcement on my mother's anniversary when she passed away. My brother normally doesn't do that, or ever did do it for some reason. Only he knows that. But I remember getting a phone call from my mother's cousin, which is my second cousin, Billy Clary, his name was. And anyways, he called me, offering his sympathy and support, and we talked on the phone. And one of the things he said, Adam, me and your mother were talking, and she wanted me to do this. When the day comes, she passed away. I said, all right. Which I didn't care. I was all right with it. And now he didn't want to step on my toes. He didn't want to cross personal stuff. He didn't want to kind of cross us the wrong way. He's just honoring my mother's wishes, which is all right. And one of the things when he told me, he said, Adam, I'm a retired undertaker. He said, I've been through this millions of times with people. And I said, I know you're going through difficult times, you and your brother. And he said, are you okay with doing the identification of the body in the funeral home? Because he said, when a person passes away, they requires that somebody within the family goes to the morgue and identifies the body. And he said, if you don't want to do it, or if your brother don't want to do it, he said, I'll do it just to make it official. And he said, what do you guys want? And he said, do you want your mother buried? Do you want her cremated? Because he said, I know how this works. I can help to make this happen. He wanted to help. He wasn't stepping on her toes. He wanted to help because he wanted to honor my mother's wishes when she was here on earth. And I said, she always said she wanted to be cremated. She wanted her ashes spread. And he said, all right, I'll talk to your brother and I'll see what he says. And I said, no, that is what she had stated. I remember that quite a bit. So my brother agreed, and that's what happened. The cremation took place. And I remember when I made that decision, it was like reality hitting you like it never hit you before. It's like everything's gone numb, it's cold, because you never encountered that before, which we all will over time. But to me, I took it at a disciplined thing to myself because I said, you know what's wrong with people like myself and ourselves is that we take too much things for granted when we shouldn't be taking things for granted. It doesn't matter who you are or what you are, what your job title is, or how much money you got. The number one thing, what we're all guilty for, is taking far too many things for granted when we shouldn't be. Because we all have our time to go, and it's just a matter of when, and a lot of us don't plan for that. And I knew that this day was going to come. Because my mother was battling two cancers at the same time, lung cancer and ovarian cancer. And I remember going to my mother with her declining health. It was always declining. She was far, far overweight from the unhealthy food that she was eating. I mean, she would steady order donairs that you wouldn't even think even existed. She'd have it. And I remember I would go to her trying to get her to help. I remember I would go to my Uncle Larry. He tried to get her some help. My mother's cousin Diane, she would reach out to my mother trying to get her some help. Her brother Brian would reach out to her, try to get her some help. It never happened. Her excuse was, don't worry about it. I'll deal with it. She didn't deal with it at all. In fact, she let it get the best of her. And I often said, well, it is. I can do two things. You can sit here, kick yourself in the gut, cry, scream, go on, let the world come to an end, or pack your stuff and move on in life. So I decided to pack my stuff, move on in life, because that's the only thing what you can do. There's no point in sitting in a corner, crying and screaming for nothing. It is what it is. You got to find a way to pack your stuff and move on. That's what I did. And when my mother passed on, I will tell you right now, it was a peaceful passing. Because once in my life, I had to turn to Jesus Christ. The one thing that I asked him to do was take my mother the most peaceful way you can take her. And that was in her sleep. I asked him to give her 1 year of life if she wants it. If she wants to continue on. Does she want to do it? Leave it up to her. He gave my mother 1 year of life. He gave her the opportunity. But when time come to go, she passed away the exact way how I asked Jesus to take her. Peacefully in her sleep. And that's exactly how she went. I only asked Christ for one thing, and that's all it was. And I got to say is, we have to stop taking things for granted because we don't know when the end's coming. You and I, our days could be ending now or tomorrow, we know. And I often say, live life the best way you can live it because we're only here for so long. Now on my father's side of the family, you got family that try to tell you, I'll save you every red nickel and all this stuff. Don't listen to that crap. You live the life how you want to live it. Don't live the life how somebody else wants you to live your life. You live the way how you want to live your life and do it the best way you can because we're only here for so long. And when my cousin, Billy Clary, came up to me, he helped me arrange my mother's funeral, which he had done successfully. My mother was cremated. And I got to say is I remember, I'll tell you a few stories about her. One of the uphill battles we often had was getting ready to go to school. Right from grade primary, right to grade 9, she fought with me tooth and nail to get dressed, get ready for school. And she would literally walk down to the end of that driveway to make sure that I actually got on the bus to go to school. Because she only knew, Adam ain't going to go to school. He ain't going to go to the bus stop for crying out loud. He's liable to run away. Majority of the time I did run away because I just didn't want to be there. But when in grade 9 at Gatesbrook Junior High, I was at the legal age of quitting, dropping out. And right from the start, I was always at risk of dropping out. It wasn't my thing, or ever was my thing. At Eastern Shore District High, where I went to high school, I quit for about 3 weeks. One of the teachers called asking if I was coming back or ever coming back. The vice principal, Gary Baldwin, would call. And I told him I quit. I'm out of here. I don't want it. So he said, Adam, why don't you take the week off? I'll call you back on Friday and we'll talk about this. So he called. He said, come in Monday. We'll talk in the office. So I did. So I stuck around. I actually regret that. I truly believe one of my regrets in the world is not dropping out of high school because your grade 12 doesn't mean anything. Without your grade 12, you can still go to community college. You can still go to university. High school is basically, and junior high is basically a daycare place to look after you while your parents go to school is basically what it is. And one of the battles that she remembered with me was the threat of me leaving Eastern Shore District High and relocating to Dartmouth High. It was actually a reality. It actually almost happened. And one of the other stories about my mother is that when she got married, one of the things what she said when she was going through her divorce was that she regretted moving on the Eastern Shore. She said, I should have stayed where I was at in the city. We lived in Cole Harbor for about 3 years, then we moved to Porter's Lake. My mother often said that she regretted leaving Cole Harbor, relocating in Porter's Lake because living in Porter's Lake was a lot like the sticks, the boondocks. The only house that me and my brother, kids our age, was next door. And the other houses, 20 miles down the road, if further than that. And, the kids next door to us, we didn't have a whole lot in common or at all. So that wasn't panning out. So, we went on our way. But when my mother filed for divorce in 1997, she often said that was the best thing that she ever did. And I would say she's probably right on that. Because one of the reasons why she didn't like the Eastern Shore is because the hassles, what some people go through, you shouldn't have to go through those extreme hassles. Like trying to gain access to a public transit bus. You got to go into town to a doctor's appointment, all this stuff. You got to go 1,000 miles to get to it. or the service is often in danger of being canceled because people are either too proud to take the bus or because they just don't want to take it in general. But they rather sit there and complain, well, why do we have a bus and nobody's getting on it? There's people on it. People ain't getting on it because they're too proud to get on it. But those are some of the uphill battles living on the Eastern Shore is. But I remember with my mother, when she had that divorce, that was the best. That was like the 4th of July to her. That couldn't happen any faster when it did. But she often said one of her regrets in the world was leaving Cole Harbour and relocating to Porter's Lake. And I would have to say that she was right about that. And when I was, me and my mother have a lot of things in common. We got the same personality, the habits of helping people in need. And one of the things that my mother was known for was, you heard the story at her funeral, was she gave up a good coach to somebody on income assistance, community service, or welfare, whatever you want to call it. This woman had nothing. She had a small kid. My mother gave her a brand new coach. Now, one of the things I often got after my mother about was the stuff that she gave away. Now, I often got after her, but if I would have known that coach was up for grabs, I probably would have brought that to a halt. But the other things that me and my mother had in common was, like when I was in school, the feeling to me in school was like an inmate in prison, walking around the jail yard, looking through the fence, wondering why, when, or if he was ever going to get out. I remember that, looking through the fence at Lakeview Consolidated School, the temptation of running away. You couldn't count how many times I had that temptation. Well, a few times I actually did. You just didn't notice it. Gates Brook, I did the same thing. Eastern Shore High, like I said earlier, I quit for about 3 weeks till the vice principal, Gary Bobley, had to call me, see what was going on, which I regret letting him talk me into staying, which I should have just went on with my original plan, leave. But my mother, during her marriage, when she agreed to leave Cole Harbour and relocate with me and my brother here in Porter's Lake, that was the same feeling. My mother living in Porter's Lake was like an inmate in prison looking through the fence, wondering when or if this was ever going to end. It was a nightmare. You didn't want nothing to do with it. She was the same way. And really, when I look at her and myself, I say that we're sole survivors of failed heirs issues in the province of Nova Scotia. Today, when you look at Nova Scotia, it's a third world country. Everything for the worst takes place. The only time your political people listens is when something's in crisis. And the other thing what my mother didn't like about me was when I got involved in politics. She did not like that at all. In fact, she despised it. She often told me, she said, Adam, you're going out there defending your community. You're out there bringing issues that matter to you and your community forward. But when you get around these politicians, they got their supporters off the side that's going to go out there and try to humiliate you, run you in the ground, because they're just there to get their parties in power so they can gain access to their pensions, and that's all that matters. And I would say that she was right. I mean, she knew when I was involved with Peter Kelly, Mayor Peter Kelly at the time when he was the mayor during his campaigns, she despised it. She didn't like Peter Kelly that well. She often told me, said, Adam, the only political person that was half decent that you were involved with was Peter Stauffer. That was it. In that year, when I was working with Peter Stauffer in 2008, the first time in my mother's life, now get this, she actually went to the voting station and she actually voted. If it wasn't for me working with Peter Stauffer, she probably wouldn't have done it. She probably just rather have that reputation going, I don't want to vote. But even though that people don't want to vote for their reasons, you still have your right to complain because you got to have a reason for not to want to vote in the first place. But at the end of this here, my mother was a person, like I said, she was a sole survivor of a failed province. She fought tooth and nail. I could never ever consider her ever being lazy because for all the cards that she had stacked against her, she overcame them all. But when she passed on, that to me was a reminder that we're not here forever. We all have a time to go, and we got to stop taking things for granted like we are today, because we're only here for so long. And I remember when Gloria McCloskey, me and her were talking on the phone, the former mayor of Dartmouth and the former Halifax Regional Council member. I remember her calling me saying, I can't express how sorry I am and all this stuff. But every year on my mother's anniversary of her passing, she's always there of support. Gloria McCloskey, God love her, think the world of her. And I tell her to do the same. Educate people more often. Now, Gloria, I want you to tell people that you people got to stop waiting on others, taking things for granted, because we're not all here forever. Sooner